Welcome to Tucker Carlson Today. It has been months since the United States completed its withdrawal from the nation of Afghanistan, a complete disaster, debacle, world historic screw-up. Pick your adjectives. It was awful. And in the months since that happened, it was awful in a very specific way. It was terrible for the United States in the way that matters most. In the months since then, one person has been punished for it. Not the architect of it, which of course you share the blame, the generals who executed it, the president who ordered it. Not any person along the long chain between the White House and those poor guys who got killed in Kabul. No one's been punished. The only person who's been punished is the one American military officer who complained about it. He is Stu Scheller. He's a retired lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Marine Corps. He spent 17 years serving this country in the Marines, multiple combat deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. He had the temerity to complain about the way that the withdrawal from Afghanistan was handled, and complain in ways that were completely defensible. Any honorable person watching it would agree. For that, he went to prison. He's now in our studio. We are honored to have him here. Stu Scheller. Great to see you.
Hey, Tucker, thank you very much for having me.
That was kind of a florid intro, but I don't think it was it was not an overstatement in any way.
I appreciate
You're
it.
No, it's true. And the second we saw that video, I had two thoughts. One, that's a brave guy right there, for real. And two, I really want to interview him. I didn't realize how soon I'd be able to. Anyway, thank you. So I just want to frame all this before I even ask you about your life with the video itself. So any viewers who are confused by this will recall exactly who you are and why you're here. This is the video, August 27th, I think?
August 26th.
26th of 2021. Here's what you made and put on Facebook.
If an 05 battalion commander has the simplest live fire incident EO complaint, boom, fired. But we have a Secretary of Defense that testified to Congress in May that the Afghan National Security Force could withstand the Taliban advance. We have chairmen of Joint Chief, who the Commandant is a member of that, who's supposed to advise on military policy. We have a Marine combatant commander. All of these people are supposed to advise. And I'm not saying we've got to be in Afghanistan forever, but I am saying, did any of you throw your rank on the table and say, hey, it's a bad idea to evacuate Bagram Airfield, the strategic air base, before we evacuate everyone?
Yeah, exactly. No honorable person watching that was unmoved by it. It was moving. But you're the only man who did it. Tell me your thinking beforehand.
So this had been building up for a while. So anyone that has been there and experienced it, it's very personal. And so in the age that we lived, I was watching the Afghanistan plan fall apart before our eyes, social media, real time. And it was very frustrating. I mean, I was talking to my family, I was talking to my friends, I was having a real hard time with it. And then about a week previous to it, the Commandant of the Marine Corps released a white letter that stated, you know, was your sacrifices worth it? Addressing all of us struggling with what we were struggling with. And he stated, if you are having trouble, you need to go seek therapy. But he never pointed out that any senior leader might be culpable for wrongdoings. And I saw that as him placing his loyalty to the other general officers and not to the junior enlisted. We could have all avoided the trip to the therapist had he admitted that senior leaders had fault. So I was angry about that. I was angry about how it was handled. And then a week later, the unit that got attacked was my first unit. When I was in Ramadi, my best friend got hit with an S-vest in 1-8. It came full circle to me. I was the regimental operations officer that put 1-8 out on deployment. I knew all the company commanders. I knew the battalion XO. I knew the officer. Like I intimately knew this unit. And since then, I had moved on to become a battalion commander. And all of this just got to a point where I knew for a fact that no senior leaders were going to be held accountable. I knew that I was going to be held accountable. But at a certain point, we need to publicly address our shortfalls, or we're going to keep repeating the same mistakes. And so, you know, even after I made that video, I made the video in my office. I didn't post it right away. I drove to my house, and you know, you're outside your house. You got your wife and your 3 kids inside the house.
Oh, come on.
And I'm pacing around the front of the house, like on my phone, like, you know, like the button away, knowing that that's going to change your life forever. And I made the decision to put that out there.
But why? I mean, everything you said, I think everyone understands your frustrations. but you're clearly smart. So you sort of knew, maybe you knew you'd go to jail for it, but you knew, but you did it anyway. So, but why'd you do that?
This has been my whole life. My whole adult life has been dedicated to America, foreign diplomacy. I wrote a master's thesis on how to make foreign diplomacy more effective. There's no one more personally invested than me. I've awards for valor, but all that's irrelevant when, I'm watching the junior service member win every tactical engagement. And the future that our general officers right now are talking about, the shift of the force, the national security strategy, it's all predicated on changes on the tactical level, how to mature the force, distributed operations. That's all tactical level stuff. We've won every tactical level engagement. What we're losing at is the operational level, where General McKenzie and the combatant commanders reside, and that link between the strategic level and the National Security Council, the Secretary of Defense, and the President. Those are the people that need to be addressed and be held accountable, because these junior enlisted are going out there sacrificing everything. I would submit sacrificing more than the general officers are, and they're not getting the credit they deserve. And so you ask me why I did it.
And those are the men you command.
Yes, I was a company commander in multiple different commands. I've been a company commander at School of Infantry. I was a company commander in 3-2, a weapons company commander, and a headquarters company commander. I was a company commander at the basic school for a bunch of officers. So cumulatively, I've been a company commander for 5 years. I had been selected to battalion command. I was in my battalion command seat for about 2 months before I made that video, so it was pretty short-lived. And they fired me before dinner the next night. So that was. But I did it because not only was I personally invested, following Vietnam, there was no general officers that were held accountable. And the narrative that's told today is how the general officers had to basically clean up the draft generation and make good service members, but they never went back and held themselves accountable. And the exact same thing is happening right now. They're taking, hey, the GWAT generation doesn't know how to fight China. We need to change it. It's the tactical problems. And they're not focusing on the operational and strategic problems, which are the same things that should have been addressed after Vietnam, and we're not. And the reason they kind of got washed away is because we had a marginal success in Desert Storm in the 90s, and that just kind of threw us off in terms of the systemic changes that need to take place. And so all of those reasons are why I felt like, it's not my place to say it. And everyone pointed that out. But there's nobody else saying it. There's just nobody else saying it.
I have too many questions, but how does that make you feel that it falls to you? How old are you?
I'm 40. I turned 40 this summer, so I had just turned 40 years old, a month before I made that video. And I'll say, I only made that one video, and I never planned it to be anything more than that. And so after I made that first video, though, the system, you would think a senior officer would put his arm around me and say, hey, let's talk about this. I know all your experiences. This has to be very personal for you. And you broke some rules, but why don't you just relax? Why don't you take a week of leave, and we'll come back and we'll talk about this like men, right? And when I first came in, my commanding officer pretty much said that, hey, there's going to be an investigation. Go back home. I'll call you on Monday. And that was what I expected. Okay, sir. And then he called me back in 2 hours later and just said, you're fired. Didn't explain to me what happened. My assumption is that the generals called him and said, he's got to get out of here. There was no investigation, no discussion. And then I had previous bosses getting on my social media and saying if Stuart Scheller was honorable, he'd resign now. These are guys that I worked for, that I thought of as mentors, that didn't even identify themselves on my social media as my previous bosses.
They said that in public?
They said it on my public social media page. So retired colonels got on my page and said if Stuart Scheller was honorable, he would resign now.
Let's ask this very stupid question. So you're not allowed to criticize anyone on social media, but they're allowed to criticize you?
This guy in particular was retired, so there's maybe a gray area there. But it added to my frustration of they don't care about me. If anyone cared about me...
How do they care about the country, actually? If what you said in the clip that we just played was completely defensible. Not only defensible, it was demonstrably true. So
I think most military members do love the country, and I think most of them are very smart. I think the problem is in the system of navigating your career, you get into the mindset of thinking about how you navigate your career and be careful and not ruffle feathers and And in playing this game, they've put on blinders and lost perspective of the bigger picture. That doesn't mean they love America less, but it means they're not able to span the room and see the real problems.
Wow, it just seems so dishonorable to say that about you on social media. Did anyone, obviously you don't need to name names, but did any of your peers, fellow officers, take you aside and say that was really a brave thing to do?
No. I had a bunch of enlisted Marines that reached out, but
right.
my peers, whenever you attack a system, you look at Iraq with the divisions between the Shia and Sunnis, and when we attacked it, you united. Same thing, 9/11 United States, you have Republicans and Democrats, when you attack it, you unite. Attacking the military system was an indictment on every field grade officer that didn't do what I did. And so instead of joining me because it would illustrate their own lack of courage, they united as a system, and the system systematically attacked me. And I understand how that works, and I understand why some of them did what they did, but I feel like what I did was the right thing, and I'm going to stand by that, and my life is going to be dedicated to making sure that there's some changes that take place. A lot of people don't think it's possible. I've been amazed at the amount of feedback I've got of, you can't change it. People truly believe that. I think the majority of people think this is the way it is, Stu, and you can't change it. I don't believe that. I fundamentally don't believe that. I think if enough of us believe in one thing, we can change anything. And, if I have to do this alone long enough, I will. But I do believe we can change it. I do think it can be more efficient. And I think all the changes that I've been talking about need to occur.
Before we get into the changes that you're talking about, take us through your life. Like, how'd you wind up a Marine Corps officer?
I appreciate that. Yeah, I never anticipated being in the military. So I always, like a lot of people in my generation, were just told, go to college and you're going to get a good job, right?
Where did you grow up? What'd your parents do?
My dad was an insurance salesman, so we moved around a lot around the Midwest. He started selling racquetball memberships, and the racquetball company went out of business. So he was young, and he was hustling, and then he's like a story of a guy that worked his way up. And so he started selling corporate insurance and was doing very well, but we were moving a lot. And so I was in St. Louis, and then I ended up in Cincinnati. So we ended in Cincinnati, and that's where I went to high school and college.
Pretty ordinary childhood then.
Yeah, I was a soccer player. I was an all-state high school soccer player. Went on and got a full ride to play college soccer. So I was very, very successful at soccer. Athlete, competitive, parents very supportive, loving family.
So you enter college to play soccer. You said you went to play soccer.
Yeah, right. So I did 2 years at a place called Cumberland College in Eastern Kentucky, played 2 seasons, and then I transferred back to the University of Cincinnati. Back then, NCAA was you had to sit out a season, so I ended up not playing. So once I transferred, that was the end of my career, but I played 2 years of college soccer.
What did you expect to do after college?
So I got an accounting degree. My grandfather was the only person in my family in the military, so he landed at Normandy. He was an Army soldier.
Literally landed at Normandy?
He did.
That's pretty cool.
He landed at Normandy, and then he went back. Normandy built a museum.
Yes, I've been.
And he went and got a standing ovation towards the end of his life, and it was
That's pretty great.
Yeah, it was probably like one of the pinnacles there at the end.
Did you know him?
I knew him very well. He's a mentor to me, and the reason I brought him up is because he was in federal service the whole time. So his brother was in the FBI. He was a U.S. Marshal. He was also a probation officer. And he told me, Stu, get your accounting degree and you can go in the FBI.
Yeah.
So my plan was always to go in the FBI. So I got an accounting degree at the University of Cincinnati, went out and got a job as an accountant. But right then the war had started. I was watching the Marines storm through Fallujah in 2004 after I graduated. And instead of going the FBI route, I just decided I wanted to lead Marines and have a chance to be in combat and make a difference.
Well, you certainly got that chance, didn't you?
I did. Yeah, I got everything I wanted. It was a good time to join, for sure.
That's one goal you can achieve in the middle of a war.
Yeah.
So what did you think of it?
Leading in combat?
Yeah, well, that's pretty... Yeah, that and the rest of it. What did you think about being a Marine officer?
Being a Marine officer is one of those things that really fills your life with purpose.
Yes.
It's very fulfilling, and you always know what your purpose is. It can be kind of overworked, underappreciated a lot of times, but it was never going to be a career for me, and I stayed in each tour because I really felt fulfilled. and I felt like I had purpose, and I enjoyed doing what I was doing. So everything I've done up to this point has been based on a love of the military, based on a love of the service members, based on a love of America, not coming from a place of contempt or hate. Like, I don't have, I think there's things we can do better, but, you know, that's why we have to have healthy conversations and have people that call, you know, that is wrong.
Did you ever have any problems in your 17 years?
No disciplinary action up to this point. I mean, the judge in my court martial was like, this is like the most exemplary record I've seen up to this point. All my fit reps were very high. I mean, I was selected for command, which means I was in the top 20% of my peers. You know, I was very competitive. I would have probably picked up 06. I don't think I'd have gotten general. I was kind of an irregular track, but I probably would have got 06. I was pretty good at what I did.
And your plan was to stay until retirement?
My plan was to get out at 20 years, but I left myself the possibility to go to 30 years and pick up 06 if that's what I wanted to do. So having done battalion command, the typical career path is I would have gone on to follow on school. And then after that, if they offered me the 06 rank via promotion, then I'd decide if I want to stay in and keep playing the game.
So you served in both Iraq and Afghanistan?
I did.
Yep. How often do officers, when they're like having beers and nobody's around, talk about the macro policies at work that have put them in those countries?
You know what? We do. We talk about it. Like I said, I have a master's in military science where my thesis was focused on foreign diplomacy. So obviously I'm talking to my buddies because I'm like, during those 6 months, all I was doing was reading books on foreign diplomacy, right? So you have to be able to talk to some of your peers about what you can do more effectively. But there are times when I got to Afghanistan, I was a young captain, and there was a lieutenant colonel probably of my experience there, and this was right after McChrystal had gotten fired. And he was talking to me about Highway 1, ring route, what McChrystal's theories were, how it was changing now that he was gone. Okay, it was interesting. But then I asked the question, well, why do you think we're here? Like on the foreign diplomacy level, and he was like, don't ever ask that question again. You know, he just scolded me immediately. And he was like mad that I asked it. And I felt
for real? He was mad?
Oh, yeah. He was like, don't ever ask that type of question. And he just shut me down and made me feel real sheepish. I was like, all right, you're right. I shouldn't have asked that question. But his point, he wasn't trying to be a jerk. His point was military officers don't be discussing like the higher purpose. Like, you're here. Focus on the strategy of what you're here. That's what he was trying to communicate with that.
No, I get it. I get it. But did you ever think about what we were doing there in the first place?
Well, I mean, that was the point of that story.
Yeah, of course.
I'm saying like, well, let's take it up to here, and he was like, no, you're coming back down here, brother.
Yeah. Descend from 35,000 feet immediately.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting. So let's get back to what happened after this video came out. So the first thing you learned by dinner was that you were canned from your job.
That's right. Well, it was actually like 2 o'clock.
Right
after lunch.
Right. So, I don't know why I'm laughing. It's so horrible. Even I spent my life in D.C., so I knew you were going to be in trouble because, the blob doesn't like this, any kind of disobedience. Especially when you're right and you're articulate, you're a real threat. If you can explain what you're upset about, they want to hurt you. I never imagined you'd go to jail. Like, that never even entered my mind. That's so crazy. How did you get to, how did that happen?
Well, a lot of what I did was based on calculating a disproportionate response. So once I made that first video, and everything I said, bosses were heckling me, I was fired immediately. I spent the next day sitting there just like meditating, thinking, and I was like, the only way out at this point is all the way through. Because the worst thing that could happen, I think the best case was I would sit in Quantico in a cubicle with an NJP and limp towards 20 years getting just shit jobs as a leper.
Right.
And I was like, I can't live my life like that. And so if I'm going to do this, it has to be like, I can't half step it. So I made the second video.
Smart.
I did it very emotional. That emotional wasn't fake, but I said some things. I probably still, if I could go back, redo some of them. But it was designed to create a reaction. But again, each time I designed it to create a reaction, I didn't anticipate the reaction to be as crazy as it was. I mean, I had after that second video, the PAO office, Public Affairs of the Marine Corps, released statements saying they were trying to locate me to ensure my safety and the safety of my family, and I was like, and I had my phone on me the whole day, and I was like, I mean, I was texting, I was calling my buddies like, the Marine Corps couldn't have called me if they were trying to locate me.
That is like Jeffrey Epstein stuff, though. We're just for his safety. We're trying. What?
And so that was like strike one for me. And then I got in the next morning, and this doc comes in. He's questioning me about my mental health, and I was like, I'm good, brother. Like, I'm not going to get my mental health checked unless the CO orders me to go get my mental health checked. Like, now get out of my office. And then 5 minutes later, came back, and the CO was like, I was hoping you volunteer, but here's the order making you go. So we went, and the doctors were super cool. They're just like, look, brother, like, we got you. And then they're like, we got it. You're mad. You're not a threat to yourself or anyone else. And they were caught and released me in like 30 minutes. But then, like, once I got out of the hospital, like, I was like so mad because I started like thinking through my mind. I was like, I missed the birth of my first son. Like, I was literally on a combat patrol in Afghanistan when my first son was born. Nobody made me go to a mental health evaluation. Like, I've missed the funeral of every living grandparent, 5 different deployments. No one made me get a mental health evaluation. Like, all these things I've been through.
That's right.
No one made me get a mental health evaluation. And I was like, and the time I say that I'm resigning and that the Marine Corps is fundamentally doing things wrong, they're going to make me go get a mental health evaluation? And then it just became this series of escalating. So then they gave me a gag order. So then shortly after, it's like, all right, you can't. Not only did it say you can't post on social media, like, you can't communicate through third parties in any forum. It's basically like, if anyone says that they talked to you and you said this, we'll still throw you in jail. And it's like, this is ridiculous. Like, this is unlawful. And so after I made the 4th video trying to prefer charges against General McKenzie, they gave me another counseling that said you violated the gag order. So in my command's defense, like, they were documenting all this, and they were still being slightly patient, even though a little disproportional. And then I knew that the generals were going to testify against Congress in the Senate, and I knew that the situation needed to be highlighted and illustrated. So I made one more post with a bunch of insightful but true. Everything in there was true, and then they threw me in jail, which I mean, I put in the post, I'm ready to go to jail, but I really was like, I mean, they just don't have the legal ability to do that. And the way they did it was they put on the piece of paper that I was a flight risk to justify me being imprisoned.
Well, you had a wife.
I literally showed up at 08 that Monday after I posted over the weekend and said I'm ready to go to jail. And then they grabbed me at 08 and took me to jail. And it's like, how can I be a flight risk to show up on time to go to jail? It's like ridiculous, you know? I mean, I was showing up to work every single day. I was responding to every text, phone call. Like, there's just no way you can defend that.
Well, so you had a family, right?
I know. And so, like, I'm looking at that. I'm like, how can, like, that is so. But whatever. So then I'm in jail. The generals testify against Congress.
What's jail like, by the way?
I think everyone should experience it at least once. Like, I was going through a lot. It was good downtime. It was good me time. Got to talk to a bunch of good Marines. Fed me pretty well.
What were the other guys in there for?
There was a lot of drug use.
Yeah, and just being a drunk idiot kind of stuff?
Just being a drunk idiot kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple guys that should have been in there. I think most of them, just young guys.
Yeah.
I thought they were all, I mean, I enjoyed the brig.
What did they think of you?
They were all...
were you the only officer in there?
No, unfortunately.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's a couple officers in there.
What were they doing in there?
I'll just leave it at that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So did the theme continue where the enlisted men were more sympathetic to you than the officers?
Yeah, I mean, they said I wasn't in solitary confinement, but I was in my own cell, but like it all led into one hallway, so you could still like hear other people, so that's how they say it wasn't solitary confinement, so they called it special quarters. So I was in special quarters, and then the rest of the guys in special quarters are allowed to get like playground outside time together, and they wouldn't let me have playground time with the other guys because they were, there was Congress members showing up to the jail. It was such a national event that they didn't want anything to happen to me, which nothing would have happened to me. But the bottom line is I had to go out to the playground by myself.
So you were alone on the playground?
I was alone on the playground.
Was that the first time you ever been on the playground?
It was cool because you could see into the general population outside of the special quarters. So the general population saw me and they were all like, yeah! They were all like cheering me on when I did my little laps by myself. So it you know, whatever. The little things when you're in jail keep you going.
And the food was okay?
Food was good. I mean, better than some of the deployment food for sure.
Oh, well, what well, that's not saying much, is it?
Yeah, I mean, I've had Otis Spunkmeyer muffins and Pop-Tarts for a diet for like months at a time, and so it was much better than that.
Amazing. How long were you in there?
Just 9 days.
How'd your family react to that?
That was the toughest time for my family. So, where I'm from, Jacksonville, North Carolina, at that point, everyone knew who I was in the town. There was like parades for me outside the base. Like people took cups and put it in the fence that was like free sheller. I mean, it became a circus. And so my kids went to school there, and so all the kids on the playground were talking to my kids like, "Your dad went to jail." My 6-year-old left the playground crying.
I mean, those are all Marine families, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, most of them. Marine families are there, so someone with a business supporting Marine families, right? So, you know, there was a general who had a daughter that my son was like interested in, and the general told the daughter to stay away from the sheller boy. And so then my boy was upset at me because he knew it was because of me. The other boy left crying. So everyone was upset.
Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah, it was. So they don't go to school there anymore. We had to pull them out. We moved them away.
Wow. That's awful. Did your kids, was the girl cute? Totally kidding. Totally
Yeah,
kidding.
I mean, they're young kids.
Oh, they're little. I didn't know how
yeah.
old they were. Okay. But did your children understand what you had done and why?
So I have 3 boys, 11, 9, and 7.
Oh, they're little. Okay. Sorry.
You know, they understood that I was doing something that was important. They understood that I posted on social media when I shouldn't have. And they understand there's kind of a mixed reaction with me because they see people coming up and giving me hugs and want to take pictures with me. And so they see the other side of it too. And so I think they're just kind of confused because they know people that have hurt them over this. They know that their life has been upended because of this, but they also see all these people showing love and support. So it'll probably be one of those things that'll play out over the next 10 years until they become men and make their own decisions.
Oh, that's tough.
Yeah.
So where do you stand now?
I mean, I don't apologize for anything.
No, in your relationship with the Marine Corps, you officially totally separated?
Yeah, so you started the interview with retired, and this is a highly debated topic of how you would sign my name. Because most people would be Lieutenant Colonel Scheller, parentheses, retired. I'm not retired. I lost my retirement, but I don't think you put Lieutenant Colonel resigned. I don't
When
think
you lost your retirement, what does that mean?
Well, yeah, it's a little misleading. I didn't necessarily lose it because I didn't hit 20 years. So the bottom line is, once you hit 20 years, you rate a half of your paycheck for the rest of your life, which over 40 years is pretty substantial for 05. And because they forced me to resign, they offered me so the deal was when I was in jail, they offered me a legal deal that said, here's 5 charges. You plead guilty to all 5 of these charges, and you submit a resignation, and you'll go to special, not general, and that'll be that. Or you sit in here for another 4 months until we get ready for general court-martial, and then we go to general court-martial, and you have the trial. If you get found guilty on one of those, it's a felony, and you know, it's a worse discharge. So I actually thought about doing the general and fighting it, but the only reason I didn't, because I do think there was a bunch of undue command influence. I think they handled a bunch of things poorly, and I think I couldn't beat it legally. But for me to ask for accountability and then like use legal loopholes to defeat it seemed hollow. And so like everything that I had sacrificed was based on this message. So to preserve the message, I just thought, I'm going to plead guilty at special. It's only a misdemeanor. I lose the retirement, which is probably the biggest loss. But at that point also, I knew that America had 40,000 people like donated like $20 at a time. I mean, it was just so, it just felt like, you know, I'm not super religious, but just kind of felt like God was involved on that, and he just kind of helped me make the decisions.
Wow. So, but you're officially separated, like you're done.
Yeah, Christmas Eve, the Marine Corps discharged me with a general under honorable, and now I'm just Stu Scheller.
What are you going to do?
Great question. I don't know. So I'm doing a couple things. You know, a lot of people thought that this was about politics. For me, this was always apolitical. What
does that mean? They thought it was about politics.
They thought that because there was a Democrat as the president, and I had an opportunity, that I Like, this wasn't actually personal to me. I made a video to build a political platform. That was like a prevalent theory out there.
They thought that?
I have military officers that like put that in their investigation.
Can I ask a sidebar question? Among the officers that you worked with in the Marine Corps, how would you say it, of those who have any interest in politics at all, how would you say it breaks down along party lines?
Most of them are conservative, but there's, I think General Mattis actually encompasses, I think, most thinking. General Mattis was about as apolitical as you can get. I have a friend that ran for the Senate in Alabama. He challenged Shelby. His name's John McConnell. He was an infantry officer with me, and he was working with Mattis a lot, and they were having conversations about Republican versus Democrat, and General Mattis told him, like, hey, they're Americans too. And I subscribe to that, right? So the problem right now is we're so bipolar because there's these extremes on both sides. Like, if you could drive a wedge between those, like, you're still going to have things that you don't agree with. No one's ever going to agree on everything, but there's probably more in common right here in the middle than there are in the polar extremes. And so if you're asking me what the military's political views are, I think it's that. I think most people in the military are somewhere in the middle, which is why it's really funny that Lloyd Austin right now is doing this whole thing on extremism, because there is you can look at there has been some attacks, but in my experience, there hasn't been any extremist that I've identified. Most of us are there because we love America. We want to support and defend the Constitution.
What if that attitude is reclassified as extremism?
I don't see that coming. I will say with Lloyd Austin, it's a little confusing. So, my biggest thing is General McKenzie should have been held accountable. And I know everyone has contempt for General Milley, but most people don't understand how the combatant commands work. When I talk about the operational breakdown, General McKenzie works directly for the SecDef.
Right.
General Milley is not really in that chain of command, and most people just don't understand that. General McKenzie, when he advised the president, there were people, I know the operational planners there, that gave plans to keep Bagram Air Base open. And he presented that to the National Security Council, and the National Security Council was like, no, we're going with this option, right? So at that moment, at that critical moment, General McKenzie had the option to say, I resign. And people now are saying general officers shouldn't resign because that becomes more political, and the military needs to remain apolitical. Okay. Well, then, when he decided not to resign, he then assumed responsibility for the restraints placed upon him. Because as a military officer responsible for that execution, he needs to advise in the artful way that a staff officer advises. Again, he's a commander, but he spent a lot of time as a staff officer, and that's what a staff officer does, like gets his boss to take what he's advising on. And when they don't do that, then you can either quit or you can assume responsibility. So, like, no one's going to hold the president accountable. We hold the president accountable by voting. The Secretary of Defense is not going to be fired by the president. And the president's probably not going to fire General McKenzie either. That's the chain of command for those three. But General McKenzie is the one that really, he killed women, children, and neutral men carrying water in a humanitarian fashion. With that incident where he killed all those people, they said, all right, we're going to let an investigation take place, and then we'll see what happens. Go back to my situation. There was no investigation. They relieved me immediately. So why, when you kill all these people, then identify that there wasn't a combatant amongst them, that you need to conduct an investigation to see if he should remain in his seat, whereas when I post a video demanding accountability, there's not one investigation and I'm fired immediately. Like, that example just perfectly illustrates the problem with the whole system. And then, of course, they do the investigation and they said, hey, it was a mistake. It was a bad mistake. But he's okay. He's going to keep doing what he's doing. It's like, you gotta be kidding me. So back to Lloyd Austin.
So a system like that doesn't work very well.
Obviously.
But as a practical matter, it's hard to win wars if the people making decisions are never held accountable for bad decisions, isn't it? Over time? How's that functional?
I don't know the answer to that. I will say, going back to what I said earlier, that there's a lot of people that think, well, that's just how it is, and you can't make change. Change is not going to come from Congress. Congress didn't hold the generals accountable. Change isn't going to come from the executive branch. Change isn't going to come from the SecDef. Change obviously isn't coming from the general officers. So what does that leave? That leaves us. It leaves us. And if we all think the same way, all we have to do is be brave enough to speak, and they will listen to us. It's just we have a lot of people that are just so used to the system, so beholden to the system, so worried about their pension and their security and their stability and their lifestyle that they lose perspective.
That's for sure. So I keep interrupting you. I asked, what are you going to do next? You said, I'm not really sure. Some people thought it was political.
Oh, yeah. So,
but do you have political aspirations?
Yeah, so I'll make the point that this was never political. That being said, there was a lot of people that approached me for Congress in 22. I thought about it seriously. I'm not saying no to anything, but I think right now, I just got done with the most physically, mentally, spiritually exhausting event of my life. But I did start, so I've been on a gag order for 3 or 4 months, and no one knows what I've been doing. So I pulled a bunch of veteran candidates across the country. So I have 5 Senate candidates. I've got 20 congressional candidates, all veterans. You can go to votesforvets.org. We got about 2/3 of them up there now. And so what I offer these candidates is a platform where I have PACs that can support them. I have different organizations on immigration, all these different key topics that can support them. I have media guys. So I have all these resources. So it's like a menu of, hey, here, this can help your platform. We also, if there's veterans out there that want to get involved in politics and they don't know where to start, we're building this right now. And ultimately, my goal for it is we need leaders, not politicians. I'm so sick of self-interested, self-preserving people that don't have the courage to do what needs to be done. So why veterans? I think a lot of these guys have what it takes. And I'll point out one race because I feel like it perfectly illustrates my point. The Georgia Senate race. Herschel Walker, not even from Georgia, moved from Texas. He's a famous football player. And I'm sure he's a great guy. But he is not the type of guy that we need leading this country. So my good friend, Latham Sadler, he's a senator. He's worked on the National Security Council as a military officer. He's from Georgia. He's married. He's got 2 kids. He's in my organization. That's a leader. That's a guy we want in office. And so I see all these celebrities. I see all these people that probably shouldn't be there. The average age in the Senate is 65. These people are making decisions that they won't even have enough life to live through to see the impact of it. We just need change. So people need to be more informed. They need to be more educated. I need to get more leaders trained, equipped, and into the game. And so what do I plan to do next? I plan to be a shadow governor, for lack of a better term, of getting the right people in the places that they need to be so that we can make the changes that we need to.
Can you raise the money? How's it been?
I've raised a lot of money.
I bet you have. So looking back on, I know it's only been less than half a year, but looking back on it, I know you still believe in the principles that led you to make this decision in the first place, but when you consider the effect on your life,
yeah,
I hate even to ask, but are you glad that you did it?
If I could go back, I would do things differently. I think the one regret I had was in the second video. I was just so angry that I said, I'm going to bring the whole system down, use that F word in there. And what I was trying to say was the system is corrupt, it's broken, it needs to be changed. But the emotion of some of those comments, I use that for an example, the emotion of some of those comments just cause, when you make that, all the people do is focus on that one comment.
Yep.
And they miss the content of everything else you're saying.
I live this every night.
It's literally I just made a post the other day and I talked about death threats to me. I talked about, 10 crazy things. And there was one thing about it's our generation's turn. And they're like, I'm a baby boomer, and the generation. I was like, that's the one thing you took away from this. There's
right.
15 other points in here, and so if I could go back, I would clean up some of those things that allow people to get misdirected. But I wouldn't change what I did. What I did was very important, and I think I did the right thing.
But talk about a life turn.
Yeah.
This was kind of not your plan.
No, not at all. I thought I'd be relieved. Maybe with an NJP, but after an investigation. And I thought quite honestly, my leaders would console and take care of me and sympathize. And it might start a conversation that was healthy. I thought maybe in the education circles there'd be a conversation.
I would think that too.
But it's like a fight. If somebody starts pushing me, I'm not going to go in the fetal position and say, stop pushing me. I'm going to push back. And especially when you think what you're doing is right. If you're protecting somebody, right? And somebody starts pushing you, you fight back.
Yeah, I know I've said it 5 times. I just can't get over how dishonorable your fellow officers were in the way they treated you. I'm sorry. I just can't get over that.
Yeah,
I was really surprised by it.
I think the mental health was probably the thing I was mad about most, but the second thing was how my peers treated me. The the problem with the Marine Corps is they do command investigations, and in my situation, everything I said was in public, right? So when you're going and interviewing other field grade officers, like, what are they going to say? Like, what are you trying to uncover? So, like, maybe they could say, well, we're trying to uncover evidence that he was a violent extremist or that he was influenced by somebody. But but what happened was they went to him and like, what do you think about what Stu did? What do you think about Stu? And so they each took turns with like personal attacks subjectively about
way.
Oh yeah. It was like, I don't like the way he smiles. We're not supposed to smile in command photos. Like, I don't like it. They talked about my marriage. They talked about
what?
They said I shouldn't have been selected battalion commander. Then 5 people before me. I mean, it just literally took the mental health. He's crazy. Took turns just systematically, personally. There was no objective based on the rules or based on the content of his message. It was just each one. And so that was probably the second thing.
Did you ever see them in person after this?
So what I did, I was in jail when I got all these.
So you saw the transcripts?
Yeah. So I got a copy of the investigation. And these guys all signed it. So I'm reading I'm like getting angry. And so I had a legal pad. So what I did in jail was I just wrote. I got a blister on my finger because I went through like 7 legal pads, just like writing future posts, writing messages to my friends. I mean, I just wrote.
A lot of great documents have been composed in prison.
That's right. So I wrote text messages. I pre-wrote text messages to all these guys. And when I got out of jail, I had like a week until my court martial. So I waited because I didn't want to send it to them and have it be used against me. But all I did was quote back their comments to them. I didn't need to use emotion or opinion. I just had to be like, you said you didn't like me because of the way I smiled. Like, this is weird. I had one that was like, I literally was at the beach with his family the week before.
No!
And, oh yeah, and I was at his house 2 weeks before that. So we did 2 family events within 3 weeks. And he said, well, I didn't even want to go into it. It was so outlandish. And so I texted him, and I was like, hope your wife and kids are still good, though, you know? So, but to your question was, did you see any of them again? So I sent all those texts. So I sent them to one guy, and I still had to come into work after that. So I pull into a parking spot. He pulls into another parking spot. And I see him, and he sees me, and it's like this awkward moment. And so I get out of my truck, and he's now like pretending to be fumbling in his truck, and I'm like, what do I do? Do I just keep walking? And again, it's like, no, I'm in the right.
Yes, you have nothing to be ashamed
So
of.
I walk up, and I just stop. And now he's like between the cars, and he's like pretending still to fumble. And now he realizes that I'm just like standing there waiting for him. So he's like frustrated. He slams the door, and he walks up. And as he walks up to me, like I don't say anything. I'm just standing there staring at him, and he screams, "Get back!" And, I'm like looking over my shoulder, like, what are you talking about? I am just standing here. And I still don't say anything.
Get back like you're like a
And then he
danger.
like shuffles around me and runs away. And that was like a moment, because this is an infantry officer, battalion commander. I'm just thinking, like, these guys are cowards.
Well, that's exactly the word I was thinking. So this is a guy who's leading men in battle?
Had I been him, and like now you're caught, you got called out on some lies that you said. But at that moment, you walk up and you say, hey, yeah, I said those things. That's the way I feel. Like that's what a man does. Instead, this guy's like, get back! And then he like runs away. Like,
he'll be chairman of the Joint Chiefs. It's one of the saddest. I mean, my dad was a Marine. I grew up near Pendleton, hearing about it and everything, and just you've really changed my view. It's just. Do you think that having just left after 17 years, do you think that the enlisted ranks are more impressive than the officer corps?
It's funny. I used to comment on that in a lot of the old movies, like the Vietnam genre, because a lot of officers back there didn't get the training that we get now.
Right.
So they would just show up to Vietnam,
For sure.
and they were
get
lost,
killed. Yeah.
and they would get people killed, and you had to listen to the platoon sergeant. That doesn't exist anymore. The officer pipeline, the training pipeline, is vets and screens pretty well. Like, the guys coming out of there are legit young 25-year-old, well-trained guys. Now, do you get some bad ones? Absolutely, but that also applies to the enlisted ranks as well, too. So I think generally the crop of officers is very good. In fact, I would submit the young company grade officer, the quality and caliber might even be better because they're more idealistic and unjaded by the system.
Yeah.
I think what happens is over time, it's the system of figuring out how to navigate your career that causes the blinders to start making you lose your way.
Yes. So there's a slow degradation of character with time because of the system.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
That's horrible. So what does that mean for the general officers? I mean, if you've made it all the way past 20 years and you're now...
The only way to do it would be to get a Secretary of Defense that understands it and holds them accountable, or to just remove like the senior chiefs, like the commandant in the Marine Corps case, and take a young major that's like the guy that was the honor graduate of that school and say, you're a commandant now. Implement some new ideas. You're smart enough to do it. Alexander the Great was a 20-something leading people through the mountains. Like, it's been done in history before. We need to change. These 60-year-old men that have been doing this for 40 years have had their chance. They've done it for the last 60 years, and they haven't won anything.
Right.
Maybe we should shock the system.
Yeah, I mean, and the system, by definition, if people get less impressive as they ascend, that's a systemic problem.
That's right.
That means you're producing bad people. You did that, you being the system, right?
Yeah, so the counter argument that we're not articulating is that there's just so many DC politics. There's so many things in the Beltway that generals need to be groomed to understand that if you were to throw one of those young majors in, they just wouldn't understand it. And that's the counter argument, is like they have to be able to understand how to navigate all this joint, all of this DC politics.
You wouldn't know the guys at Raytheon, so it wouldn't work?
That's right.
Sorry.
I mean, it's fair. I've been talking about how the Secretary of Defense comes off, he literally comes off CENTCOM, becomes a Raytheon board director, and then goes from that to the Secretary of Defense. Like, if that is not the biggest ethical violation, like how we allow that to happen, it's mind-blowing.
It's at every level of government. It's just pure corruption. I mean, it's just pure, what else is that?
And so then he comes off the Raytheon board director, becomes the Secretary of Defense, which Secretary of Defense, arguably the best job in the world. And the military has so many fundamental issues. So many fundamental. When you talk about procurement, education, like I could go on and on all day. And he spends 100 days as Secretary of Defense, and he comes out and he's like, all right, I've oriented on the problem, and the biggest problem facing the DoD is COVID. And I was like ready to put my head through a wall. It was like, are you kidding? Like, that's what you came up with? The biggest threat is COVID? Like, there are things rotting us from the bottom. Like, either you just don't know, or you're playing a political game, but either way it doesn't matter because you're not benefiting the junior service member if that's your diagnosis of the problem.
God, that's so distressing.
Yeah.
Can I just ask you one last question?
Please.
Who are are you at liberty to name like someone you admire who's in a command position in the U.S. Armed Forces you think is like a model for what?
Yeah, the military's got a ton. So like, again, I started with, I have love for the service. So in the Marine Corps ranks, there's General Wortman, General Worth, General Klingon. Those are all 1-stars, and I've worked with all 3 of those men, and phenomenal. They're charismatic, they're wicked smart, but they're 1-stars. And so 1-stars are at like 25 years, 4-star at 40 years. 15 years is a long time.
Right.
You know what I mean? But I'm just super impressed with those guys. In the Marine Corps, for at least, like my peer of current battalion commander John Meixner might be one of the smartest people that I've ever met. There's a major named Matt Tweedy who's an honor graduate at EWS. There are some brilliant people in there, like brilliant. But again, the system can kind of grind them down and not necessarily always select the best talent. But like a John Meixner or a Matt Tweedy, if you were to take these guys and make them the commandant, like they could do it, and they would actually probably do a lot of good. But people are just so scared of these fundamental changes that they're resistant.
Man, you're not only brave but wise, and I would say even more impressive in person than you are in your Facebook videos. And I'm so glad. My one editorial comment is, everyone looks down on politics, especially me. It's disgusting. The people are disgusting. On the other hand, if you want to change things, like what are your options?
That's right.
And so I'm glad you're doing that.
Thank you.
And I hope you make a big difference. Stu Scheller, thank you.
Thank you.
Tucker Carlson Today is the name of the show. New episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on Fox Station. And of course, every weeknight, relentlessly, we will see you at 8 p.m. on the Fox News Channel.